Court, Executive Director of the Citizens Independent Transportation Trust, or CITT for short. We're the entity of Miami-Dade County charged with overseeing your half-penny sales tax for transportation, which is helping to pay for a variety of transportation improvements throughout Miami-Dade County. With me today is a special guest, John Rossant. John is the CEO and founder of CoMotion, and really has a fascinating background even beyond that. John, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks a lot. It's great to be here, and it's great to be back in Miami.
Thank you. So you say back in Miami. So where are you stationed normally?
Well, I hang my hat. I mean, my family and I are based in Los Angeles on that other coast. But I come to Miami very, very frequently, more and more often.
LA, what I call Miami without the humidity, right?
You could say that.
Many other differences, of course.
Yeah.
So, John, first of all, tell me a little bit about yourself. You have a fascinating background if you want to delve into some of that.
I was young. I needed the money. I'm sorry. I shouldn't say that on there.
I didn't do enough research. I missed some of those.
Okay.
So tell me about yourself, John.
Well, I spent a lot of my career in Europe. A long time ago, I was actually in the press for quite a long time. I was with Business Week magazine. I was their Europe editor. And then
The whole continent. Okay.
Yeah, we had a bunch of bureaus around, like in Frankfurt, and London, and Rome, etc. And I had the good fortune to be based in Paris, where I kind of ran that.
Not too shabby.
And that was fun. And my wife is Italian, so we have roots in Europe, etc. So actually, all in all, I spent maybe 15, 20 years in Europe. So I think a lot of my adult career has been there. And then I guess I saw the writing on the wall for the print press starting about, I don't know, close to 20 years ago. And I sort of began seeing what else is out there. I had a great career as a journalist. And I accepted an offer to join a very big Paris-based company called Publicis, which is very active in media, advertising. It's, I think, the world's second largest advertising company. They own Saatchi & and Leo Burnett, et cetera. They had grown very quickly through acquisition. And I think they were interested in me because I was sort of a Europe-based American. Half the business is here in North America. So I joined their executive team, overnight I became a corporate suit, which was interesting. And I had something I had to get used to kind of quickly. But after a year or two, I was going all around the world. I would sort of go to Shanghai for a business lunch, for example, and back again. I mean, that evening, things like that.
You had a lot of points.
A lot of points, spending a lot of time just in the air. And then I was sort of considering doing something else, and the chairman made me an offer I couldn't refuse, which was to run one of the big subsidiaries based in Switzerland, which, among other things, is behind the production of the World Economic Forum in Davos, which is this big gathering at the end of January every year of sort of public and private sector muckety-mucks, world leaders and CEOs. So I was in charge of that for quite a few years.
Draws a lot of demonstrators.
Actually, not that many.
Not too bad. Okay.
Yeah, and they're kind of contained. There has, I think, 6,000 crack Swiss troops guarding this little alpine village when Davos takes place. And so not only was I in charge of that, but also all of the World Economic Forum gatherings around the world in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, in China, et cetera. So that was just amazing. And it kind of coincided with my beginning to be more and more intellectually interested in how cities were developing. And I come from something of an urbanist background. I grew up in New York City. My uncle was an urban planner and did the plan for Lower Manhattan. So it was just part of my life, I suppose.
I think all New Yorkers are essentially amateur urban planners.
Yeah. And so about 15 years ago or so, something important happened, that as a species, we became, for the first time in human history, a majority of human beings became urban. And I felt that we have to get cities right if we're to survive as a species. And I was more and more interested in the impact of new connectivity technologies, the internet, sensors on city operations, and that I felt that this would really impact how cities could be planned and run. And so I thought that this should be very central to the conversation of world leaders and CEOs in Davos at the World Economic Forum. And at that time, there was actually some pushback. And I thought, well, no, this is a really good idea. So that led me to leave what I was doing and set up my own independent nonprofit foundation called the New Cities Foundation to focus on city building in the future, on building sort of next generation cities. And we had immediate support, financial support from a number of large corporates like General Electric and Ericsson and Cisco. And so it was a success from the beginning, and it was we were one of the early movers in the sort of smart city movement. Right. So when you look at cities, you get very quickly to the mobility and transportation piece. Yeah. It's absolutely essential. Yeah. And just to make a really long story short, about 9 years ago or so, Google approached the New Cities Foundation because they were investing more and more into research and development of autonomous mobility at the Google X, which is the Moon project unit they have in Mountain View. And they wanted to understand how in the future driverless cars would work in an urban context. And so we were happy to welcome Google to the foundation. And that happened right at the same moment that a little startup in San Francisco called Uber began offering rides in New York City. And everybody was like, hey, have you heard about this company called Hubert? Or, nobody really knew. But
what is it?
But it became a success very quickly. Yeah. And we thought, gee.
I hope you got some early shares.
Unfortunately, I know. I've never been that smart. So between sort of autonomous vehicles and ride hailing at scale, we suddenly thought, wow, this is going to impact every city on Earth, big or small. And so I felt as a city-focused foundation, we had to really look at the mobility and transportation piece and the disruption that was starting to happen. So we organized a first little conference called Cities on the Move, the Future of Urban Mobility. And Google was good enough to give us some resources to invite people to sort of fly in and give us a auditorium in Mountain View. So we had the first edition in Mountain View. And it was really one of the first times that people working in driverless car technology, people working in electric cars, people working in transit agencies got together, actually.
Big data, I would imagine.
Big data, absolutely. And so it was absolutely fascinating, big success. We organized another meeting in London and then another one in Tokyo, kind of gathering expertise, et cetera. And then we started looking at Los Angeles, the world's largest car city. Mm-hmm. And the city government at that time had just published something called the Mobility 2035 plan, which was very far-sighted, and it was essentially a blueprint for a kind of post-car Los Angeles. And so,
do you recall who was the mayor at the time?
Eric Garcetti, who recently stepped down. He was term limited. He's just been confirmed as the U.S. ambassador in Tokyo. So I went out to L.A. with our team, really impressed with sort of their vision and their plans. And I thought, why don't we take this itinerant conference, bring it to L.A. and build it out in a kind of Davos South by Southwest way. Right. And that led to launching CoMotion. CoMotion LA is a sort of big conference gathering all the stakeholders, public and private, who were in the new mobility space. And we had our first CoMotion LA conference in 2017, and it was 2 months earlier in LA, in Santa Monica to be precise, Bird, a little company startup called Bird, had launched the first shared electric scooters on the streets of Santa Monica. So things were really starting to happen, and CoMotion LA took off very quickly. We also launched a media platform around the mobility of tomorrow, which has now grown into quite a big platform of newsletters and webinars and podcasts and things like that. And now over the last few years, we've just been delighted to be here in Miami, in this amazing city.
Okay, right. So it all started in LA, CoMotion LA, and now there's a CoMotion Miami.
Yeah.
And that started how many years ago now?
4 years ago. And
So
actually,
pre-pandemic?
pre-pandemic,
Right.
exactly, a year before the pandemic. And it was under the previous mayor of Miami-Dade, Carlos Jimenez, who, if you will remember, was actually very interested in mobility. And he had been, I guess, head of the fire department, et cetera, but he loved vehicles that
He
moved.
did. And he particularly loved the idea of where mobility intersects with innovation.
Exactly.
And technology.
And so he was very farsighted in that way. And he had come to, I think he had come to CoMotion LA, and he certainly had sent some of his people. And so it suddenly said, hey, what about doing a CoMotion in Miami? And we were immediately receptive. At that time, not only because Miami, really interesting city, et cetera, but we felt the Latin American connection was so interesting. And even though the mayor of Los Angeles likes to say that Los Angeles is the northern capital of Latin America, that, of course, is completely wrong.
Yes, we would take issue with that.
Yeah, so Miami is in every way the northern capital of Latin America,
Sure.
as you know. And there's so much mobility and transit innovation happening in Latin American cities, in Bogota, in Medellin, in Rio, all over the place. And so we felt that having a CoMotion in Miami would be a really good way to focus on that.
Right. And meanwhile, and actually probably more recently than when you first started here, we have this explosion, right, in technology
Amazing.
companies and
Yeah,
investment.
totally. I mean, that was
And
that
maybe
was the,
you were an impetus to that, right? That was,
I don't think so. I think that was a variety of factors. I think that was, I really must give Francis Suarez his due. I mean, he's been an amazing
how can we help? Right?
poster. How can we help? And I hate to say it this way, but COVID was good for Miami, as we know. I mean, I don't mean to be flippant because many people suffered, but Miami remained more or less open when other cities were closed. It was, well, you know the story. It just attracted capital and both financial and human in an unprecedented way to this city. And so, we absolutely love that. And I think it's a wave that's continuing.
How did the pandemic affect CoMotion?
Well, as a company that has a very big event arm, it was not possible to have an in-person event the first year in Miami, and so we did it virtually, and it was fine. It was absolutely fine. Yeah.
All right, so let's fast forward now to 2023.
Yes, amazing. Yeah,
It's crazy how time flies. CoMotion Miami is, I believe, taking place in May. So
May 10th and 11th.
Let's talk about the conference and what's in store for people who might want to attend.
Well, good. It's going to be a great conference. It certainly will be the biggest and broadest and most interesting yet. We're super pleased to be doing it in the port of Miami, which
new venue for you.
New venue. We had been in Wynwood, which was great in the Arts District, very hip and cool. And it was wonderful, but we felt that the port is obviously very close to downtown, so it's really in the center of the city. And the port of LA, for example, is miles away. You would not want to do something there. But it's very dramatic with all the terminals. And we also feel that maritime mobility and boats, et cetera, port operations are really going to be one of the next big challenges we face in terms of technology upending how things are done, but also the imperative to clean it up.
Right.
If you go in they're just, there are electric boats, but they're tiny, there are a few hundred on the seas around the world, not thousands. And if you think of bunker fuel and diesel fuel and the gunk that goes into making ships and boats run in the once pristine waters of Biscayne Bay and Miami Bay, it's terrible. You have to clean that up. And so there's a wave of innovation that's starting to happen in that field.
No pun intended.
So no pun intended. So we're very happy to be in the port.
Right.
And as you may know, for example, Miami-Dade County has ruled quite recently that ships that come in, the big cruise ships that come into Miami have to operate on what's called shore power,
Right.
and not on their own power, which is, diesel generators, things like that. So I think things are really starting to shift. And also we're seeing this amazing new vehicles on the horizon. Like, for example, last year at CoMotion Miami, we launched, it was the world launch of an amazing new technology called Sea Glider, which is essentially an electric-powered seaplane. But the FAA actually considers it a boat, so it doesn't have to be certified as a plane.
Okay.
And it hovers 5 to 30 feet over the water. It goes about 250 knots an hour. And no pollution. Very, very efficient. And because it has smart hydrofoils when it comes into a harbor, it can navigate the harbor very, very well. And so this will, vehicles like this will revolutionize coastal transportation
Absolutely.
in the future. So, for example, getting from here to Palm Beach,
Right.
it will take 20 minutes on this.
Yeah, we've been talking about ferries in Miami for ages.
Yeah.
Seems obvious. We have all this water.
Yeah.
Most of our major employment
Yeah.
centers and residential areas are on the water. Why not connect them?
Right.
And the issue we've had is manatees, right? It's all a manatee protection
Manatees.
zone.
Exactly.
Well, if you're just hovering above the water, that's no longer an issue. So
Exactly.
potential application,
Yeah.
right?
No, I mean, that's going to take off. It's called Regent Craft. They're out of Rhode Island, I think.
Okay.
And so that was one of the things that was unveiled here in Miami.
Do you have some featured speakers you want to?
Yeah, I mean, there are going to be a lot coming from around the world, by the way. So we have a big delegation from France, from the city of Paris, from Britain, from Canada. We're hoping that Secretary Pete Buttigieg will come, and I'm a very big admirer of his, by the way. I mean, he can be sometimes controversial in some of his policies, but he's been a great Secretary of Transportation. He came to CoMotion Miami 2 years ago. It was our virtual Miami, but he piped in, and that was great, live from Washington. But we hope he comes physically. Daniela Levine Cava will be here, of course. I think Francis Suarez is going to be traveling in May, as he often does, so he may not be here. But we have a lot of founders and CEOs and people from very innovative mobility companies. We're about sustainable mobility, so it has to not be polluting. It has to run on electricity or hydrogen, for example. There's so many interesting startups in the space now. It's exploding. If you think about it, if you go back sort of 20 years, traditionally, there were 3 American car manufacturers, and that was kind of it. And now, because of the revolution in the way things are manufactured, it's much easier to manufacture at scale with less capital expenditures. Plus all of the technological revolutions in terms of miniaturization of batteries, new propulsion, non-polluting propulsion technologies, et cetera. You have an explosion of companies operating in the mobility field.
Yeah.
So you have new electric car companies like Rivian or Lucid or others. We never saw that before. Yeah. So I liken it I call it the Cambrian Revolution. So in geology, about 200 million years ago, there was a moment where before that moment, you had basically single cell life. And then something happened, and boom, you had mammals and, snails and dinosaurs and whatever. And that's sort of what we're seeing in the mobility scene now. So you have, dozens of scooter companies. You have suddenly out of nowhere, seemingly the development of advanced air mobility options for cities.
That was one of the focuses, as I recall, of last year's CoMotion.
Yeah.
Urban air mobility.
Yes. And in fact, Florida is a natural player in that space. Because if you think of it, and I've always argued this, and I think I feel a little bit like I've helped attract some of these companies to Florida. because it's the perfect terrain, perfect geography for anybody starting out in aerospace, because Florida has an aerospace tradition, very, very important. It's flat. It has a north-south axis of urbanization. You have a lot of small little airports, and you have the coast, which is sort of perfect for flying over.
So I have to admit, when I saw that last year, I was a bit of a skeptic. So, I could see it being a bit of an Uber, if you need to get from point A to point B, how that would certainly facilitate it. But could it ever be done at a scale that would make a true mass transit for everyday commuters?
Well, Javier, that's the question. And I think if you go back sort of 4 years ago, a lot of people would have said, yeah, this is going to be the future. And Uber, for example, was betting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars on the sector. And they had a division called Uber Elevate. And their vision of the urban future was scores and scores of thousands of flights, low-altitude flights over city every day.
The Jetsons.
The Jetsons. It was a really Jetson vision. And everybody, including myself, like, wow, this is the future that's coming along. And I would get up at our conferences in LA and Miami and say, 3 years' time or 5 years' time, to get to this conference, I'll come in an electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. So, of course, it was overhyped, but it will be a reality. Will it be big enough reality that it will be a alternative to public transit? No, I don't think so. But it will be part of the multimodal transportation offer of big cities and big urban regions. So it will, there's no question in my mind that, let's say, what year are we? 2023. Well before the end of this decade, it will be a common sight in southern Florida. And if I have a meeting in Palm Beach, for example, or perhaps
you could have used
Tampa,
one today.
I could have used one today coming in from Miami Beach. Exactly. So we'll see that. And there are all sorts of configurations. Some are sort of short hops that would, from Coral Gables to Miami Beach. Others are some longer that will take you to Palm Beach, for example, or some further out the coast. So that's coming. It's definitely coming, and it will be democratized so that it's not, to get from downtown Miami to Palm Beach, for example, in a kind of on-demand way, won't be $500. It could be $100. It could be $75, which is probably an acceptable price point. Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the sea, we've talked about the air. Let's talk about kind of earth-bound
autonomous vehicles. Yeah.
Autonomous vehicles. You knew exactly where I was going. So that obviously has also been much discussed and much hyped.
Absolutely.
And absolutely is going to become a reality. In fact, we have autonomous vehicles on our roadways today, right? Some of them with drivers for safety reasons, but from what I understand, we have some even without any kind of rider at this point. So what many people want to know, including myself, is when is that really going to hit, right? When are we going to see that made available to the public? When are we going to see, public transportation or buses, be automated? My dream when I retire is to, own an RV and travel the country. I'd love for that to be automated so I could sleep in the back and show up at my destination.
That will be great.
What's the time frame? And I know it's not certain, obviously, but you know this subject matter probably better than most. What is your best guess?
Well, it's already happening. If you go on the streets of the city where I live, Santa Monica, there are dozens and dozens of cars, Waymo, which belongs to Google, and it's a big autonomous robo-taxi company that they are piloting it every day. They have drivers for now.
Right.
So the problem is that kind of autonomy that you have in mind, that you just get into a vehicle and you program, okay, go to this place, and it navigates the streets. That's called level 4, level 5 autonomy. It's very complicated technically to solve. It's a really big technological problem because you have a million, a zillion, what we call edge cases, which means a child suddenly running into the road, a grandma tripping and falling into the road. How can you anticipate that? And so it's a very big technological challenge. And Google, which has been investing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, as well as other companies, have not been able to fully crack that. And it will take some years to do that. But autonomous mobility will exist in other kinds of dimensions. So you mentioned buses or vans or things like that go on predetermined routes. Those will become autonomous pretty quickly in the next 2-3 years, without a doubt. And you have a lot of companies who are experimenting with that, like May Mobility out of Detroit, which is becoming quite active here in Miami, and others. Autonomy will work in trucking, for example, where it's a slightly easier problem to solve. It's sort of point to point. It's on freeways. You could have a lot of companies are working on something called platooning, which is you have a truck in front with a driver, but 2 or 3 trucks behind have no drivers, but are just automatically follow the lead truck. It's kind of like a train, but on a highway.
And there's a huge incentive for those companies, right? Because labor is obviously an enormous cost for them. They can bring that down. It's worth the investment and the risk.
And it's very hard to find truckers. It's the average age already is about 55 or something. It's quite old. Trucking companies find it difficult to attract younger workers. So it's something that will become automated without a doubt. One of the reasons why Florida has traditionally been chosen by a lot of companies working in the autonomy field is that you have these terrific kind of Petri dishes like the villages, which are these big planned communities with older people. They're gated, and so there are no big surprises. There are no kids.
Relatively safe and predictable.
And you think also for autonomous services for older people, it's a really good solution also. And so that's why you've had a whole bunch of the services piloted in those communities. The other thing about Florida is, and I really hand it to former Senator Brandes, who in the Florida Senate, who really single-handedly helped write the laws in Florida around autonomous mobility. It made Florida a place that these companies could really come and roll out services in a very intelligently regulated way. So he had a very big impact, I must say.
Wonderful. Well, listen, we're running out of time, so if there's anything else you want to discuss, we can do that. But I don't believe we actually told folks where they can go to get information about the conference. So
absolutely. It's www.CoMotionMiami.com. And I think we have a early bird special that's still valid. So if you go soon, you can get a ticket at a quite reasonable rate.
And those dates again?
May 10th and 11th.
Right around the corner.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well, John, listen, thank you for appearing.
Thank you.
On our show.
It was really fun.
You're a fascinating guy. I'd love to learn more about you.
Good.
Maybe have you back on next year.
Likewise. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Folks, thank you for joining us. Again, this is Mobility Matters. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time. Please join us and follow us at www.miamidade.gov/CITT. Thank you.